Okay. Hey, Dr. Criswell, it's Matt Kipling. So, I just got done writing my conceptual interview. I'm bundled up in a blanket because it's kind of cold and it's also raining outside, so it's kind of not a good day. But anyway, so wanted to talk to you a little bit about the just my whole conceptual interview and the things that kind of made it up. So, Zach Cornett and I were partners, as you know, and we went about it in a little bit of a different way than most people would. So we actually got to conduct the experiment in front of people, which was pretty cool. And so we were trying to show students the conservation of mass through an experiment. And in this experiment, what we did was we combined magnesium sulfate and 100 milliliters of water and just diluted it. And then we did 50 milliliters of water and then put, I believe it was a teaspoon of sodium carbonate in there, and then diluted that, and then added the sodium carbonate solution into the magnesium sulfate solution, and a precipitate formed. So what we were trying to get at was just having students understand that conservation of mass is real, that nothing is or matter is not created or destroyed, and we wanted them to understand that even though they might not know necessarily the vocabulary terms for this specific experiment, that there were a lot of things that went into it, and that they could learn a lot about the conservation of mass, and that a chemical reaction could, form a new substance. So, some interesting ideas that surfaced throughout the interviews. We kind of anticipated that students would have a hard time realizing that two aqueous solutions, although they might not know that term, could form a solid, aka the precipitate. And that was something that we really struggled with one of the students. He just was baffled by the fact that this solid thing could not form. And he was actually the gifted student. And he felt that it was more of it wasn't a solid, it wasn't a precipitate that formed. He felt that it was just that the densities were different. So the lesser solution, the sodium carbonate solution, was just going to sit on top of the magnesium sulfate solution because of the densities, which I thought was really interesting to think about. So to me, that kind of said that, hey, I don't really understand what's going on in this certain reaction. I might know it, but I'm not recognizing, the law of conservation of mass. The other student was a low achieving student, and she recognized that there were a lot of things that went into this kind of experiment, and that she described it as like a putty-like substance that had formed, and that's exactly what this solution looks like, what the precipitate looks like. It was like a white, milky, kind of putty-like substance, which was pretty cool that she actually used those words, and I was very proud of her. So that was really awesome for me as a teachable moment to kind of get to think, and after the interview, I kind of explained things to her, and she really understood it, which was great. All right, so some lessons learned about interviewing and asking good questions. So, as I was, writing this conceptual interview paper, I kind of realized that my questions weren't really good questions. They weren't really necessarily student centered. I wish that I had kind of gone back and asked more questions about what do you think is happening? How do you feel about this? Things along those lines, because I feel like it gives the students the opportunity to answer in their words, and it puts not as much stress on getting the answer right necessarily. It's more of an opinion based question. And I feel like students can learn more from that. And when I'm asking them, I mean, this whole setting was intimidating for them because it was a one on one kind of a setting, and I was doing this experiment in front of them. And I feel like they kind of had an issue with wanting to answer correctly, um, but a lot of times they didn't necessarily know how to answer correctly. So asking questions like, "What do you think? How do you feel?" What um, instead of "What happened here? Did a chemical change occur?" Things like that would help in the long run, I think. So I feel like just really having really having my questions student centered would be really important for me. Um, Okay, so the next thing, implications of what was learned for teaching this concept. Okay, so conservation of mass is something that at Morton uh, students have been introduced to this. Sixth, seventh, and in eighth grade, they've talked about it in all of them. Um, but I think that whenever you have students that especially high achieving students that don't necessarily answer the questions correctly, it kind of hurts your confidence as a teacher a little bit because you have to think about, okay, do I need to go back and reteach this? Do I need to help students relearn what's going on, help them understand what's going on, or what do I need to do in this instance? And so that was kind of upsetting to me. Um, but then I had to remind myself that, hey, you're not the actual cooperating teacher in this instance. You're not the one who taught them, about conservation of mass or about chemical reactions or anything like that. You're just someone who's coming in and asking them, hey, what is happening in this scenario? So reminding myself of that was really important for me, and that's something that I had to continually remind myself throughout my part of the experiment as well as in Zach's, because we were at the same placement and we got to do them together, which was great. Um, so implications of science teaching in general. Wow, okay, that's a huge, broad thing. Um, Teaching science is something that's really unique. Getting students and giving them the opportunity to kind of explore and learn at the same time is something that I don't really feel like there's any other subject that can do that. Um, I love hands-on activities. I love when students can do things themselves. Um, However, in this instance, I was one who had to do it. I had to perform the experiment in front of them and ask them the questions. I feel like if they kind of got to do it and I got to ask them more leading questions, I feel like they would have done better. Um, but I mean, science teaching in general, wow, there's so much that I could talk about with that and go into with that. But I just feel like students getting them excited about science is what's important. Helping them understand what's going on, and that there can be explanations for things, and that we are constantly discovering new things, um, is what science is all about. I feel like, and when students kind of start to understand that, and when they are getting close to understanding that, then that's when they start to flourish in the science classroom, or at least that's what I believe. And I did get to see that in my placement, which was really, really cool. And so having these two completely different students answer these questions about this conceptual interview was unique in the fact that uh, student one, who was the low achieving student and the female, she was more correct because she wasn't afraid to answer the questions, than student two, who was a gifted student who always had to be right, who wanted to be right, who science was his thing. He loved it. So the way that you go about teaching things, I feel like, needs to really come from the way that you set up your classroom, meaning that you need to have a safe environment for students to learn, an open environment where students can make mistakes and not feel intimidated or be too shy to raise their hand and answer. And so hopefully that's what I get to do in my classroom one day. Okay, see you in class.